Greetings, everyone. It's time for a video. I'm going to cover what I've... no, actually, I take that back. I'm going to look at what I've done to diagnose a problem with my 2007 Honda Pilot. I've got an alternator issue, it appears. There's the battery charging light is coming on, and I have a new battery. So, well, battery's about less than 2 months old, and it's a good one. I'm not really predicting that it's a battery problem. I changed the battery about 6 weeks ago, and it's worked well. And then we went on a trip, and the battery charging light started coming on and off occasionally. So when that happened, we kept going. And in fact, it went fine for most of the trip. And then about 20 minutes before I got back home, started having a problem again. And in fact, now the battery charging light's on all the time. So I'm going to go to the car real quick inside and show you that. All right, I'm in the car. Turn the key on. Everything operates the way it should. With the key on and the engine off, your battery charging light should actually be on, and that's correct. But then when you turn the car on, the light stays on. So there could be a few issues with this. For what, I did a bunch of reading, I did some research. I have a service manual. Service manual gives you a basic diagram. It's not as good as, say, having an electrical troubleshooting manual, which you can't get, but they're expensive. And then, the service manual also has just your basic flow charts, which, sure, you can do that, but it's better to really understand what's going on, because even some of those things can be misleading as to what's happening. So, at any rate, I followed along the procedure, and let me go grab that real quick, and I'll show you what that looks like. Hang on a second. So just to give you an example of what you get from the service manual, this is kind of what they say. So, like, for example, this is their charging system indicator circuit test, their procedure. For example, turn the ignition switch on. Does the indicator come on? Yes. Start it, hold the engine speed, which is supposed to test what happens under load, and then it go off. And then it says, indicator circuit is off, go to the but my case, it does not go off. So go to step 3, have this whole gauge self-diagnostic thing, because what could happen is your gauge could be off. And I'm going to show you a circuit diagram in a second, which will cause some of this to make sense. I ran that. That thing's it's quite hard to do it without the Honda diagnostic system, which is their version of, a scan tool, test tool, etc. Then you turn it off, you disconnect the power connector, which we'll get to in a bit. And is the indicator off? No. In my case, it did go off, which means you need to check. They say either repair or replace alternator. I'm pretty sure it's the alternator. And I ran through this, but of course, as I said, this is there can be other issues that would cause this to fail. So honestly, you should do this after you checked other things. So let's talk about the circuit. Sorry, I'm holding this up with I'm doing this with my phone, so it's trying not to be shaky. So this is kind of what you get from the circuit diagram, which is pretty decent. It shows you everything, the most of what you need. And there are things that, based on just the fact that I can start the car and it runs, that we know that are good. So this main fuse runs a bunch of things, but considering most everything comes on and most stuff runs through this thing, this stuff it's pretty sure that it's pretty good. There's a bunch of test points and things to keep in mind when you're working with this. And I had to go through and learn and understand what it meant. Honda has what they call their ELD circuit, which is called the electric load detection circuit. They have a detector. It's up here. And what that does is that detects the load on the system and tells the PCM what's going on. Hey, you've got a lot of load. And the PCM then knows that, hey, based on that plus what's on the battery, the load on the battery, that you need to indicate to the alternator that, hey, you need to run higher, because this system that Honda uses has 2 modes. It has a low mode, which puts less load on the alternator and somewhat the engine. And they have a high load that when it's charging or needs charge, it'll switch into high current mode and produce more current for the system based on the load that's detected by this ELD unit. So like I said, if you follow through, you can understand that that there's things that we know already probably work. But like I said, I'll go through that in a minute. There are things though that even with that procedure you need to check. So, for example, to give you an indication of what you need to worry about. Obviously, there's stupid things that you should check just in case. And since I changed the battery, I had to go through and check these anyway. There are 6 connections that come out of the alternator that it uses to communicate and work with the rest of the car to do its job of providing electricity, to charge the battery and keep other parts of the system running. There's the obvious one, which is the big black line that comes out called the B+ connector. That goes into the battery through this fuse, and which is in the main fuse relay box, and that's what charges the battery. Then you've got the, I think that is this is the L connection, which we'll talk about the colors in a bit when I actually get back out to the car to show you this stuff. This indicates and goes into the alternator. This is from the ignition, and that's supposed to be 12 volts, meaning, hey, you got 12 volts and this is good. When I went and I've tested these, and I'll show you again what I did to test them to make sure things are good. But part of what you do here and then part of what you do in other places is test some of the voltage. One of the other changes that Honda has had, and it's versus their old system versus the new system, is that, and I say new, it's like new for like 2007 and whatnot. I don't know if they still do this. I haven't found any information about it, but I haven't really dug, honestly. So, for example, the indicator, the battery thing that I showed you, which is saying, hey, there's a charging problem. It used to be run directly from the alternator. So there's this line, let's see, which one is it? It's L, and the L goes out and says, hey, that means turn on the lamp. It used to be in the old Honda system, it went directly to the dashboard battery indicator and said, hey, it turned it on when it detected the problem. Now it actually doesn't do that. It actually goes and communicates with the PCM, which then in turn through the CAN bus tells the driver for the gauge control module to say, hey, there's a charging problem. So slightly different. So you could have, in theory, you could have problems here. And that's kind of why when they're showing to say that you need to test the gauge control self-diagnostic procedure, that this we'll go through and make sure that this module is working. So there is a purpose in it, and it actually is handy to have. Now I left off the second half, which is all about going through and testing all these connections, as well as the PCM itself, because you could have a PCM problem, which fortunately, from what I can tell, I don't. And let's talk about that now. So I've tested this. Of course, you've got the ground, but here's something to keep in mind. The ground for this, the entire body of the alternator is grounded. It's grounded through its bolts. There's also a ground connector, which when I get back out there to the car, I'll show you in a minute, that you can test from that to the battery negative. And as long as you're getting continuity and no serious voltage drop, you'll be in pretty good shape. So, and we can talk about that in a bit. But this all, for me, tested out fine. So that just leaves these 3 lines. And this is the lamp line, which, like I said, the voltage regulator is telling the PCM, hey, there's a problem. This is the C connector or C line, which is the control line. This is what the PCM tells the alternator, hey, there's a lot of load being detected. Please turn on. And we need you to turn on more and more and more, or not, if there's no load or there's a low load on the system. This is the last thing. This is called the field regulation or FR connection that goes back. And this is the alternator, the line it tells the PCM, hey, this is how busy I am. In other words, it's basically telling it what its duty cycle is. So I've got all that. You can see all my notes here where I've scribbled, and I have a couple of them where I was writing down some stuff. But there are things that, like, for example, when there's no problem with the charging system, the L line should be high, but when the voltage regulator inside the alternator detects a problem, it's going to pull this line low, the lamp line, and that's what this is, in turn, triggers this to go on. You've got the control output. Normally it's low unless it detects load, and then, of course, when it's high, it'll pull it up to, say, 8 volts. And then you've got the field regulation, which it's kind of interesting. How that works is that the PCM presents a 5-volt signal back to the voltage regulator. And what it does is as it works, it'll pull it down and then pull it back up and pull it down and pull it back up. I might, if I decide to, I might hook up my oscilloscope and see if we can try to see that. But we actually won't see anything because this thing isn't working. So, but you can test to see if most of the things are working just with a multimeter. And I'm going to go through and show you that. I'm also going to show you, I have a scan tool. I'm going to show you what values that you can read off to see what that is too. I found out a lot of information about this, including a research paper from a university. I put all links in the description below to that so you can see what that is. So let's go back to the car and we'll start going and checking with the multimeter for some of these connections. All right, back at the car. I'll point out a couple of things real quick on where some of these connections are. This is the bracket, but like I said, and here's the alternator right here. And then this is the battery plus connection, which I'll show you what that is in a minute. This is the remaining wires. There's 4 going in. And then we'll talk about those in a minute as well. So you've got the ignition, the other 3, the L, C, and FR connections. You don't need to show ground because, like I said, ground, there's a bolt underneath this bracket as well as the bracket itself, which all ground to the engine block and thus ground the entire alternator. Of course, over here, you got your battery plus. This connection right here, that line, is the main one that goes into the fuse box. Now, I already tested the fuses. I tested the main that went in, and then I tested the one that runs, I think, to the ECM as well as the one that runs into the ignition main, which, you know, you can look at this diagram here and see some of that stuff. So let's see. Let me see about setting up some of the stuff and showing you real quick. Hang on. Okay, got my multimeter. I'm set to DC volts. I have negative connection on battery positive. And then now we're going to go straight to, see if I can get you in the light here a little better. I'm going straight to the battery alternator connection, and I don't see anything, and the reason I don't see anything is, well, I see a small voltage drop, but it's well within what we want. If you're seeing a bigger voltage drop, well, then you might want to look at a connection issue, but in this case, it's 0.07 volts, which is more than well acceptable. So we know that the B plus connection is good. Now, if we go to the ground, let's say right here, we'll see, in this case, negative volts because I have negative here and positive here, but 12.55 volts, and that's good. Now, we can verify that that's pretty decent by going to here where I've got, with my multimeter, I'm going from battery positive to battery negative. Of course, I'm going to see negative voltage because I've got it flipped, but we're seeing roughly the same voltage. So our connections are really solid. That's a good sign, and that way we can knock off both the ground and the battery plus connection from the alternator to the battery is being a problem. So let's see. I'll get you set up to do the next stuff. Okay, I've unplugged the alternator connector, or alternator line from the connector on the alternator. And if I look at it from the front, well, if you look at it, pull the cover back, you can see there's 4 colors. You've got, hard to see them, you've got black and yellow, white and blue, white red, and white green. And if I'm holding it like this, which I'll consider this the front, so you get the clip there, this is what it ends up looking like. You've got your black yellow, which is the ignition, white green, which is the control, white red, which is the field regulation, and then the lamp is white blue. So we need to check this one, and the reason for that is I've read that if this is off, it can cause real problems. So, in fact, if you remember the circuit diagram, that the voltage regulator uses that to know that it's on. Now, what you can do is you can just turn the key on and then check to see if you've got 12 volts, in which case you know that part of the circuit is good all the way through it. So I'm going to try to show you how to do that. Give me a second. All right, kind of a problematic setup, but this is how I'm going to do it. So I got my multimeter, it's hooked up. Remember, I got negative to ground. This is the positive. If you very gingerly poke and front probe, you can see what voltages you got. So remember, right now I'm going to test this black nail on. That's the ignition. I've got the ignition on. So according to this, I should see roughly 12 volts. So assuming I can get it in there and I just lightly touch it, you can see I've got 12.23 volts in. So I'm getting 12 volts here, which means that that connection is good. Now we can go ahead and we can check the others. Let's see, this one is, that's white blue, and light blue is the L. I think that actually should be high right now. Oh, lost you there for a second, sorry. This is not the best setup. Yeah, it's on, and it's indicating there's a problem. And then the field regulation should be nothing right now. No, I take that back. It's 5 volts. That's right. Sorry. This is without it connected, so it's going to pull it high. And then last thing is this right here, which is the control signal. Now the control signal is low, which is correct because the PCM is telling the alternator it's not doing anything right now because it's in low mode. That's how it starts out. So, and it's not connected, so you're not. I think this one actually needs to be a little different. Regardless, that's where it's at right now, so we're fine right now. Now let's see here. Yeah, I'm sorry, I told you wrong on this one. Right, that should be 5 volts. The field regulation, the white with red, because, like I said, that's the signal that the PCM is sending. The signal that it's sending to the alternator for the alternator to tell it that it's busy. In this case, we're getting 5 volts because, you know, it's open. There's nothing connected to it, and the multimeter isn't going to pull it down enough for it to tell it that it's doing something. So anyway, right now everything seems to be good. All right, hang on, I'll be right back and we'll do some more here. I have a scan tool. This is an Autel MaxiCheck. I think it's the MX808. Picked this up. It's pretty decent. It's not a bad tool. I might do a video about it. I've had it for, I don't know, over a year now. Anyway, for if you go connect to the PCM and go into the control unit and get some live data, this is where we're at. There's 5 values we really care about. There's the battery, there's the ignition level, there is the ELD sensor output voltage, which is the electronic load detector, in other words, what it's putting out. There's the alternator duty cycle, in other words, the field regulation. This is what's being sent back. It's at low, meaning that it's not doing anything, and then there's the alternator control signal. Right now, it's with it hooked back up, the alternator is actually being commanded to go high by the PCM, which is fine for right now. So right now I've got my multimeter hooked back up to the battery directly. We're getting 12.4 volts. We're seeing 12.3 volts DCM. The ignition level is high because I have the ignition key on, so that's correct. There's some load, which is going to be for, you know, things like the computer and other stuff that's running right now, and then like the gauges, which are, you know, it's showing the charging indicator, as well as the oil pressure and a couple other things, and there's lights and stuff. Everything so far looks correct. Now, if I turn this on, we'll see some values change. Hang on, I'll turn my car on. All right, the car's on. You can tell there's load. The battery voltage dropped a bit because it's now pushing stuff. It's dropped down to 12 volts. Ignition level is still high, which is good. Now, of course, the ELD, we can see it's working because now it's saying there's a bigger load. The alternator is still not commanded to go any higher. They're still not actually saying it's going any higher while the alternator control from the ECM is saying, hey man, you need to turn on, and it's not. I think what I'll do next is, for me to go any further to show anything, I'll have to back probe the alternator connector. If that's not too hard for me, I'll set it up and I'll show you a couple other things. But this gives you a rough idea that with a scan tool, you can also see some information pretty quick that the things are working. I'm going to turn the lights and a couple other things on so you can really see the load go up. All right, headlights are on high beam. Of course, now you can see the load on the car is higher, and notice, of course, the battery voltage are dropping, which is consistent. The alternator itself is still not producing anything while the alternator control it's telling it, hey, you need to go up. So right now, about the only things we could do is really back probe in to see if this alternator control signal is actually correct. All right, so I've got the oscilloscope set up, and by the way, this is using the mix sig. We'll see how it works. Plus, I've got the current probe going. Current probe's hooked up in the alternator. That's channel 4, which is green. Let's see. Channel 1 is the yellow channel, and that is the ignition voltage, which is the ignition back probed in. This is the ignition ignition voltage level. And then the blue is the field regulation voltage, and the magenta, which is channel 3, is the control signal coming from the PCM to the alternator. So right now I've got the key on, engine off, and this is exactly what you would expect, other than this, which is peculiar. This square wave, this thing should be high, honestly, from what I can tell, so that's a little suspicious to me. I'll set the trigger level to down a bit to lock the wave, but that thing should be pulled up right now. It shouldn't be pulled down like that. Plus, the other thing is that this thing's being commanded, I guess, low. It should be high otherwise, but it's low, so something kind of suspicious there. This really makes me think something's out of whack with the alternator. So I've got the probe set to 10 amps, but normally you'd have this on 100 amps, and there's a reason why I'm doing that, and that I want to make sure there's no low current coming out and something else is out of whack. But anyway, I'm going to start the car up. I'll be back in a second so we can see what this is. So just keep in mind, this is key on, engine off. Alternator shouldn't be doing anything, and this is going on. I can't keep this on long, though, because my batteries are running low because I've been testing stuff out. So I'm going to start the car up, and I'll be right back. All right, back. Again, what's really suspicious is that the alternator, the field regulation signal is pulled all the way down, which shouldn't be. This is, and the other thing, of course, is there is no current coming out, none. So at this point, I think there's something really out of whack in the alternator, and that's what I'm going to call as being the problem. So obviously, I've got to go change the alternator out, and after I order one and all that stuff. But okay, I'm back, and as you can tell, things are a lot better. For example, battery voltage is running at 14 volts. Ignition level's high, as you'd expect. The ELD sensor, of course, is still working, showing 15 amps roughly. Of course, big difference. The alternator is now running at 46%, and then the alternator control is still being told high. But of course, the big plus is now the battery is seeing 14 volts, which is good. Now, come over here to the scope, and there's some great things. Your ignition voltage is high, which it should be, and it's roughly equal to what we see over on the battery. A little bit higher, kind of varies a little bit, but that's fine. But the big difference here is, of course, now our duty cycle is good, and we can even see we have a nice square wave, which is what we should be seeing. And then, of course, the other thing is that we know the alternator is being commanded high, and this signal is running almost. It's supposed to run about 7 or 8 volts, sorry, and when it's commanded high. So things are looking good, and of course, the other big plus is now we're seeing roughly 22 amps coming out of the alternator going back into the system, the battery, etc. So that's it. This is what it should look like, and this is a good thing. So that's about it for this video, and this has been pretty cool. I've really enjoyed doing this, though it's a bear to set up and everything, and of course it wasn't fun changing the alternator, but apart from that, it was pretty cool. So anyway, that is really truly it for this one, and thanks for watching.